present ourselves to you, Dad, and we say, just speak to us. What do you have for us? Why are we here? We thank you and we praise you. In your name we do pray. Amen. Now, IT has a lot to do with information and efficiency, and I heard a story that made me think of, because this room is so diverse. There was a flight happening from here to New York City, and one of the guys was an American. The other guy was, as some people represented here, from different cultures. He was from the Middle East. And the American guy was a businessman, so he began to brag about America and his business and his farm and all these different things. And it was so funny because he gets to this point where he says, my farm and ranch is so big that if you were to drive from the gate to my front door, it would take you 35 minutes, right? And he's feeling good. And so the Middle Eastern guy, at this point, kind of comes to, he's been patient, he's been quiet, he puts his hand on his shoulder and he says, I used to have a car like that. and I think what's so interesting is, as I've gone through, so the verse for today is Matthew 22, 34 through 40. Anybody familiar with that verse? The Great Commandment. There's the scene where the teacher's standing before God and he says, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Now, typically what I would do is, as I was praying about this morning and I was running, I usually put a lot of emphasis on some of the negative things that happened in my life. But what I believe the Lord said to me this morning was, son, I really want them to hear more about me. Okay, let's do that. So as I was unpacking that verse this morning, I think there's three things, and the first one we'll touch on today. How do we love God with all of our heart, all of our mind, all of our soul? Is that an easy thing to do? How do we love God with all of our heart? I want to take you to two other passages of scripture that's going to set the scene. And this morning, if we get a little uncomfortable, that's okay. Because I don't think the Bible is here to make us comfortable. But the first thing I'm going to take you to is Matthew 6:24. Matthew 6:24 is the scene a few chapters earlier where God is saying, you have to choose who you're going to give your heart to. We're going to focus on the heart one today, not the mind. I can spend years talking about serving God with your mind, especially in this culture. I can spend years talking about the soul. Which, interestingly enough, has anyone used the Bible project that software they've given us to do word studies yet? Have any of you dived into that? I encourage you to do a word study on the word soul. The Hebrew word is nephesh. It doesn't mean anything that you think it means. It actually originally meant throat, but then they carried it further. But we're going to talk about loving God with all of your heart today. How do we be genuine with that? So in the beginning of this passage, the Lord is saying you have to pick. Are you going to serve mammon or are you going to serve God? Well, then you fast forward to Paul, and Paul says in Romans 7 a very interesting thing. In 7:21, he says, I noticed within myself two laws. So when I was first coming up in my life, I was born in Florida, and when I hit about middle school is when my life started to shift very negative. That's when my father was affected by Enron. A few of us has talked about that. His degree was in computer science from the University of Central Florida. So anybody here impacted by Enron at any point in your life when that business went down? Well, he became a truck driver. Yes, he became a truck driver. And so in this season, we went from typical house, my sisters and I, decent school, to nowhere to live. My father was home 2 days a month. Well, as I said, I'm not going to put a lot of emphasis on how dark that season became. But what happened is I began to realize that there was a part of my heart that was incredibly selfish. And I might be the only one that can relate to this. But as a young man growing up in the church, my parents took me to Sunday school, I went to vacation Bible school. But what I wasn't told was that there was a side of myself that was going to go to war with the things of God. That there was a side of myself that wasn't interested in loving God with my whole heart. That there was a side of myself that only until recently have I discovered how incredibly selfish it was. And so I began this long descent into two things for me when I was coming up. For me, it was anger and it was lust. I was in a Q&A yesterday with Jim Daly, and Jim Daly began to talk in such a way. Oh, were you guys all there for chapel yesterday? Did you guys hear what Daniel, the speech he gave to the young teenage boys? It was awesome looking around the room right then when he was describing it. All these adults were like, whoa, I just got warm in here. But the interesting part is, for me, lust and anger as a young teenage boy, that was not described for me. And as we look at the news today, Jason Gray, Spring Creek, Willow Creek, as we look at Hybels Church, we see these moral failings one after another. Why? Because we're not being honest. And this morning, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or to stand up. See, I was that guy where the teacher would ask something embarrassing, and I just didn't care. I'd stand up and say, yeah, it's me. But I'm going to challenge you today to consider for yourself, are you loving God with all of your heart? What does that mean? Right? We talk about, it becomes so churchy. I feel like at Focus, we've heard like all the churchy things, right? Like the answer is always Jesus. But do we really allow ourselves to be impacted by this statement of what does it look like to love God with everything inside of you? One of the things that gets in the way is that there is a side of you that doesn't want to love God, right? And we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that selfish side of ourselves, right? We wait until, I don't know what's left of, you look at the news today, it seems like every aspect of the church is impacted by it. Well, for me, when I entered college, I got to this point where I was no longer interested in the things of the world. I had my heathen days. Anybody have any heathen days? Don't raise your hand. So I was that guy who in high school, it was like all church all the time. And my parents made the mistake of thinking just because my grades were high and I was lettering in sports and I was an All-American scholar, that my heart was in love with Jesus. Right? Like I was teaching Sunday school and all these things, and my teachers didn't know I didn't have anywhere to live. Side note, if you ever want to change schools without an address because your church put you in a motel for a couple of weeks, don't. Because what will happen is they'll say no. So what I found myself is like, I was this guy that everyone said, oh, you're doing so great. Look at you, you're persevering. But when I got to the university campus, I had to figure things out in my heart that no one helped me walk through. My parents didn't pursue me in that way. They thought, oh, he's listening. He's great. Look at him pray. Aww. They didn't pursue. So what happened was, I found out that in my heart was selfishness. What happened is, after my heathen phase, did you guys like my gesture? After my heathen phase, the Lord then said, I want you to learn about me. And I spent the next 6 or 7 years actually learning about the will of God. That's actually something that you can know. So many people pray and say, God, what do you want to do? I think that's an interesting prayer because God makes that very clear. But over the next 6 years, I began to learn about who I was, about who God was and what God wanted me to do. I soon became a youth pastor at a church, worked there for 3 years. And then after a while, they said, hey, we think you should plant a church in Denver, which was a big deal for me. I had a huge heart for Denver at the time. And it seemed like that selfish guy was gone. I got married. Side note, along the way, I almost died twice. This is no longer the focal point of the story, but the Lord allowed me to really learn about His grace. If you ever had pneumonia, anyone ever had pneumonia in here? It's awful. It's very terrible. Especially when the nurse says, you should have died. That's like, wow, I'm glad I didn't. And then the kind of the crux for my wife and I, when we got engaged, my wife was born in Russia, and we were $90,000 in debt from the good debt, student loans. Isn't that don't they try to call it the good debt? Like, that's the good stuff. Right? Like, as long as it's a mortgage or student loans, you're a good person. If it's a credit card, come to the altar, right? So I'm sitting there, and her family is not excited. That's the you know how you have to be politically correct? You have to be like really nice about things? Her father was not excited. So at the time I was working in health, so my degree's in science. Her degree was in social work, which means we were making a lot of money. And at the time, the interest payments were like twice as much as our monthly income or whatever it was. So they said, long story short, every time I asked him, he said no. I asked more than 3 times. And I got to this point where, this is a bunny trail. Please hop along the trail with me. And there came this point where I said, I think God is asking us to get married. Long story short, we'll be debt-free in 2 months. It's all great. Everybody's come around. They kind of avoid eye contact now when they talk about it. They're like, man, the beginning was kind of rough, huh? I'm like, yeah, you were not nice. Let's talk about the beginning. The beginning was kind of interesting, wasn't it? Anyway, you as I look at my life, there's a season where I first learned about my selfishness, right? I learned about my selfishness. Then there was this season where I learned about God. And then recently, God came to me and said, hey, let's go back and deal with that selfishness. This was like 2-3 months ago. Working in a new church, working at Focus, and God says, hey son, I have a proposition for you. Me and God talking, God knows me, it's okay. And God likes to have conversations at 2 in the morning. If you haven't figured that out yet, God is not super interested in sleep. He wants you to go to heaven. It's great. So God was like, hey, let's deal with that selfishness. And I was like, no, I'm good. I'm going back to sleep. Love you, but have a good day, right? God's like, no, let's see what that young man was searching for. These last 2 months have been some of the hardest months of my life. I had to be really vulnerable with my wife, which is, right? All the marriage books say be super vulnerable with your wife. We've been married for 3 years. I cried to my wife. I said, here's where I feel like I need you. But these last 2 months, I've had to go back and I've had to unpack what Romans 7 is talking about. And for those of you that have never done this, for those of you that think prayer time is just boring, does anyone ever here struggle to pray for like an hour straight? Is that hard for anybody? Right? You like get into it and you're like, oh, okay, I think I'm done. Jesus, you know my heart, right? And then go watch TV for like 6 hours, right? I don't know that TV, so I don't know that life. But the prayer time for me has easily become 2, 3 hours. As God has said, I want you to tell me the aspects of your heart that I want. You ever tried that? Can you guys do me a favor? It's gonna be okay. Believe me. It's like a trust fall. I got you. I'm gonna ask everybody close your eyes. It's gonna be great. I want you to take a second and think about the thing that you have been praying for the longest. You have worked next to some of these people for years. Your family, your friends, they do not know some of the deepest desires of your heart. They don't know that thing that you said, God, where are you on this? They don't know that thing that you said, if this prayer got answered, my life would be totally changed. You can open your eyes. It's so interesting because I think what the enemy does is the enemy says, if that prayer was to come to pass, your life would be better. And for some of us, we have really hard things that we've been in. Right? Some of us don't like to talk about it so freely. But for some of us, we just got plans we've been working for, things we've been saving for. We want to see someone get healthy. But I think what God invites us into is God says, peace is a person, not a promotion. Amen? Do we live like that sometimes? God says peace is a person, not a possession. God says peace is a person, not a place. Right? God says you have the total ability to be whole now. So what I'm going to invite you guys into, IT department, the brains of the business, the smart ones. You guys look good this morning. What I'm going to, I think you look nice. So I'll just come downstairs more often and say it more often so it doesn't sound weird. Put my head over the wall. You look amazing. One of the things that I'm going to invite you to notice when you go back to your desk is what aspects of your heart does God not have? What's that thing you're kind of wrestling for? Because my heart wants to serve 2 masters. We don't talk like this. We just wait until something crazy happens. I was asked, you guys will understand this because you guys build infrastructure. So somehow along the way, I got really into combatives. I got into boxing, martial arts, that type of stuff. So a church asked me to build a security ministry at their church. Isn't that interesting? They had a guest speaker come in and said, we need a security ministry, small church. So I showed them the cameras, ran financials, presented to the executive team, had people sign up for that military background, and they were going to be undercover, and they had little earpieces, and we escorted, we had backup plans, all this kind of stuff. So that part was great. Got to meet Carl Chan. Anybody know who Carl Chan is? He was the guy who, for the Real Life shooting, was responsible for that. And I got to work first name basis with the police. It was great. Jason Blance, other officers came and presented. The reason why I tell you this story is because they said, hey, John, since you're helping with security stuff, we're going to bring you behind the veil into communications that we have with security ministries with things that happen around the nation with churches. I did not want to be a part of that. I started getting emails every day about stuff that happened in churches like pastors. It would break you. It's crazy. It's crazy. Why? This is where the class gets interactive. Why do we see moral failings in the church with high regularity? Why are our children leaving the faith in droves at the university? Why are we able to look so polished around each other and say we love God, and yet have things we are ashamed to talk about? Any takers? I was a teacher of high school. I can wait a long time.
Can you repeat the question?
Why do we come around each other and we look so put together? We look like we just came down from Mount Sinai with the tabernacles. Where's my veil? I'm glowing. And yet, the news is showing that the church is really, really struggling. Families are struggling. Why do we have even things in our heart we want to talk about?
I would say it's human nature. The Bible says God looks at the heart, man looks at the outward appearance. So since man look at the outward appearance, we always try to look the part. But you're talking about the heart, and I've dealt with that, and I continue to express myself and pray to God about what's in my heart. Give me a clean heart, And so I would say if your heart is clean, it's not a facade or front, it's just you. You know what I mean? Because God, He will come out of you, exuberate or whatever, and it will show. So you could tell, like when somebody sees someone, if your heart is clean, you could tell what's real and what's not real, what's phony and what's, And so I just think it's human nature to dress the part, but you're not the part. And once your heart get clean and God get inside and you confess everything, you're talking about some people. They will talk to God about it. I think once He sets you free, you're able to share, so it could bless somebody else. And then some things you may not want to talk about because sometimes it's human nature to throw it back in somebody else's face. So it's like you need to know the wisdom what to talk about and what not to talk about. And so I think if your heart is clean, it's like what you see is what you get. You don't have to put on a front like with me. I don't put on a front. What you see is what you get. Like it or not. As long as it's pleasing with God and He loves what He sees, that's the main thing.
Good for you. Good for you. What's your name?
Esther.
Esther. Yeah, give Esther a round of applause. Thank you so much. As we get ready to land this plane, Augustine said, "My heart is restless. Our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you." C.S. Lewis said, "If I find within myself a desire that nothing in this world can fill, I must have been designed for a different world." And for me, so in my life, the Lord and I just talked about these 3 seasons. The first season was I became acquainted with my flesh and my selfishness. The second season was I became acquainted with my Father and His faithfulness. This last season I became acquainted with the choice. Which one will you pick? By a show of hands, who in here is perfect? Good. We can get that out of the way. Why did you show that for a second? Right?